Namaste. I am Gloria Grace Rand, and I am so glad to be with you for this live edition of Live, Love, Engage. We're coming to you live as we do on Wednesdays on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And I also want to welcome those of you who are listening because I do appreciate all of you listening to this rebroadcast on your favorite podcast platform. And I am looking forward to today's show because I've got a guest waiting in the wings who I am going to bring in right now. And I'm going to tell you all about her. So I first want to bring in Laura Formentini, who is an author, nonprofit photographer, and philanthropist. And while working as an advocate to encourage people to travel, see more of the world, and catalyze positive global change, she also became a child welfare activist and a supporter for the prevention of cruelty to animals. And her philanthropic work spans the globe, touching lives in Puerto Rico, Kenya, Malawi, Italy, and numerous countries in Asia. And as if that isn't enough to keep her busy, she's also an author. She wrote a book called 21 Olive Trees, A Mother's Walk Through the Grief of Suicide to Hope and Healing, which was published just in January of this year and was an Amazon bestseller. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff and also a little bit about random acts of kindness and how you experience that. So first off, now let me officially welcome you, Laura, to Live, Love, Engage.
Gloria, thank you so much for having me.
Well,
It's an honor.
I'm really glad to be able to get the chance to have you share a little bit about your story because we met a while back at a publicity summit, and I was very intrigued by you. And so I thought I always love to start the podcast off by asking our guests a little bit about their journey, and you certainly had quite the wide-ranging one. So, what really has sparked this interest in you? I think even particularly to be, a philanthropist and traveling all the world and helping people. What started all of that?
Well, I've always been a very curious and empathic person. So I have a background in archaeology, and
Mm.
so I was always interested in traveling and exploring the world, and I've always been very just a curious person in general. And so archaeology was always was my passion. And I'm originally from Italy. I came to the US when I was in my early 20s, and I went to college here in the US. And then I started going on archaeological digs all over the world. And the more I traveled, the more I realized, because I'd go on archaeological digs everywhere. And the more I traveled, the more I realized the disparity, the disproportion between rich and poor in the world.
Mm.
And that organically led to photography. I just, as I was on my digs, I'd start taking photos of whatever I was seeing, street photography, landscape photography. And that also eventually led to ethical photography, which is nonprofit photography. So I ended up I started working with just, various nonprofit organizations here and there. And I became curious to see how people lived. And it was incredible, because it led me to go to places that I would have never thought
Mm.
I'd visit, like Africa. So I ended up going to Kenya, Malawi, and Malawi is, for instance, one of the poorest countries in the world. And the poverty was crazy. And, and it really impacted me. And so I said, when I came back to the US, every time I come back to the US, I was thinking, wow, I need to do something more. I need to do something for these people, for these animals. It was just visceral. Once you see certain things and the condition in which certain people live, you cannot not do anything, especially for an empath. I'm very empathic. And so I got into the fundraising little by little. I learned how to fundraise, and then I got involved with Global Giving, which is the largest fundraising platform in the world, and I was able to work through them for or various organizations. I ended up setting up an animal sanctuary in Sicily, thanks to Global Giving, which is also an educational program. But then I also fundraised for communities. I ended up fundraising for an orphanage in Kenya, right outside of Nairobi. And so I left the archaeology behind, and this path organically led me to become I don't really like the word philanthropist. I just like I like to I like to call myself more of as an activist. I just see when I see something that needs, um, you know, it's there's when every time I see something that needs, um,
Like attention, maybe?
attention,
Something.
exactly. Thank you. I cannot not step in. My very first trip to Africa really impacted me. And so, when I was in Kenya at the orphanage, it was an orphanage with about 120 kids. I realized that right away that it was a very rundown place. So their dorms and the kitchen and everything was just falling apart. And so I realized that. So the founder, Mama John, a Christian, wonderful person, she asked me if I could help her to fundraise or help her to renovate the building and help the kids to go to school. And I could not say no. I said, sure. So when I came back to the States, I gathered all my friends and I started, I put together all sorts of events, and eventually, yes, I brought in the funds to renovate the dorms and renovate the kitchen. And I was able to bring in the money to fund the tuition for the high schoolers to go to college. So, but also at the same time, when I was there, I was very curious about these kids because they didn't really have much. So their frame of reference was really, truly all they had seen throughout their lives was what they had. So this rundown place, and they would just eat in the yard on the in the grass, and they were used to poverty, but for them it wasn't poverty. For them it was a normal state of being. And so they didn't have much in a material sense, but there was this unity, this love that connected them all. And that was really inspiring for me because I thought to myself, wow, the kids any kid at their age in the US or any what we call first world country, would never be happy in this kind of situation. They would complain about it. They didn't complain about it. They were just all smiles and super happy and just came to me and hugged me when, and so that sparked my curiosity to ask them if they could write their life stories. And I said, well, could you please write down your life story? Where do you come from? Do you remember your parents, or do you remember your family of origin? What is it like to live here? And so I ended up collecting the autobiographies of these kids. And it was really interesting because these kids, they go from about 4 years of age to 18. Okay. So some of them were able to write. Some of them, the young ones, were not able to write. So the matron or the the people working there, the say the founder or the
Right.
helpers, the assistants, they were able to write down their stories. And so,
Mm.
I ended up putting together a book on this experience. So it's, which I hope will inspire a lot of teenagers, and because it's a really inspiring story about their lives, but also how the founder, Mama John, was able to actually put together this children's home on
Mm.
her own by herself.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it was a wonderful experience.
well, that sounds awesome. So are you working on that now to get it published? And
Yeah, so originally I was going to publish this book, which is, the title is Coming Home,
Mm.
but I ended up publishing another book first, which is 21 Olive Trees.
Yeah.
And because I thought that might be, you know how life goes. You just plan certain things, and then, things don't go
Things
according
happen.
to plan.
Yep.
And so I ended up publishing 21 Olive Trees, and then this book will be published next year.
Okay.
So early next year. Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to that because
Thank you.
it's amazing, and you even answered the question that I was getting ready to ask. So it was good when you were talking about, kind of what impact you had it, or what you were impacted by when you're talking about the children there. So that helped me. Well, let's shift focus a little bit. So, I know life happens, and you had something really terrible happened to you, and that prompted the writing of your book. Can you share a little bit about, what happened in your life, and then why you wound up writing the book?
Yes, so I was, it was 2019. I was down in Ethiopia, and I was working with a group of locals for one of my books. And I was in the rural Ethiopia, actually. It was just south of Addis Ababa, the capital, collecting stories of positive transformation from some of the locals. When my older son called me from the US, and he said, "Mom, please sit down. I have to tell you something." I said, "Oh man," I knew right away that, my gut told me this is going to be bad. So he said, "Well, please sit down." And he said, Blaze, his brother, my younger son, just killed himself.
Mm.
And they found him in a park. And so I, everything went dark, of course. And, they helped me. The Ethiopians I was with helped me to sit down, and they helped me to find a flight to go back
Mhm.
to the States. All I could think was what had just happened. I was, it was just a blur. And so we ended up finding a flight. They helped me to put together an itinerary to go back. And so the ooh, it's always hard to talk about it, but
Oh, yeah.
even if it's been almost 3.5 years, but it's in a way, it's hard to believe that that person is me, because it's been 3 years and so many things have happened within 3 years. But when I go back to that, it's really hard to talk about. But there was this unbelievable person. It was a friend of the group whom I didn't know, who said to me, "Listen, nobody can come back with you to the States." And once we found the flight, I'm telling you, it was something like 36 hours. So I had to fly
Mhm.
back by myself after, finding out something like this by myself. And he said, "Don't worry, nobody can come back with you, because nobody in the group has ever even known, doesn't even know what a passport is. But I can stay with you until your departure." And so this amazing person, out of the blue, it's like an angel who materializes, he decides to stay with me and until my departure. And you're talking about 10 hours. My flight wasn't
Mhm.
until night.
Wow.
And he hangs out with me all day long, holds my hand, caresses my cheek. And
Mm.
right away he says, I'm your brother, you're my sister. And I was like taken aback. And, obviously I was in shock. I could not function, Gloria.
Yeah.
But he holds my hand and talks to me in a way where, oh, like I had known him forever.
Mm.
Holds my hand, takes me to lunch, shows me where he and his family live, and hangs out with me all day long. Sweet person, sweet personality. And then, it's time to take me to the airport finally. And, throughout all the ups and downs of the day. And I asked him, why did you do all of this for me when, you don't even know me? You have no idea who I am. And he said something that I'll never forget, something that stayed with me for the next 3 years. He said, I didn't do anything special. You are my sister and I'm your brother. It was simply my human responsibility.
Mm.
And so I take that flight after, we part ways. I go on that flight, and obviously, all I can think of is my son. But at the same time, I'm thinking about him. I'm like, this is something a person who has never met me did for me. And the beauty of it, there was something that, what is even more extraordinary, Gloria, is the fact that he didn't think that he had done anything special. It's like,
Yeah.
I didn't do anything special. I'm like, but he saved my life, because
Mhm.
not only he saved my life, I would have never made it on that flight, but his words stayed with me.
Mm.
And those words, those actions, that's what I called it's a small act of kindness that we can all practice. We can all do something like that without we think that we're not doing anything special, but we can save someone else's life. And that is really incredible how, small random acts of kindness can really change the world. We
Mm.
don't have, we can all start here. We can start right now. We don't have to do anything grandiose. We can just start here and right now with what we have. And in fact, this man is poor. He told me, I have very little. He paid for my lunch, and and his wife was very much pregnant. She was due within a week,
Oh,
and he
wow.
stayed with me.
Oh my goodness.
So that's what prompted me to write this book, because basically when I went back, I you know I realized that I needed to release what I had inside. So I started writing poems and notes and letters to my son. But then, and that was, a way of just releasing the stress, releasing the emotions. But then these letters and poems and writings turned into a book. And this book, I realized that could be a lot more than just my own personal release. It could be a book that could help others going through their grief, because it's a book that really describes my path, from the how I felt initially, that uncontrollable pain and grief, through all the setbacks, and then eventually the acceptance and the healing. Because I realized that I had been writing this book all along with my son, because even if he was not there physically, I could feel his presence. I could feel his
Mm.
energy. And we were very, very close, him and I. We were like what most people call soulmates. So
Um,
I always felt that presence. But, and so I kind of like realized that I was writing this book as a helping hand, just like
mhm.
the stranger had held my hand. I
Right.
realized that that was my way of giving back. He
Mm.
held my hand. This book can hold your hand.
Mm.
And so,
Mm.
yeah. And so it's been a wonderful, you never know where life takes you. But I think that if we realize that we can start here, we can start right now. The moment we step outside of our homes, we can do all sorts of beautiful things, just small acts of kindness. We'll never know. We'll never know.
Mm. Absolutely. Um, I'm curious, I wonder if you can Sure. Where did the idea for the title? So what is the meaning behind like 21 olive trees?
My son was 21 when he
Okay.
passed
I had a
away.
feeling that was part of it.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was 21,
Mm,
and I picked the olive tree because to me, the olive tree is a symbol of strength and
mm,
power. If you
mm.
look, I'm from Italy originally, and we have olive trees, especially in the South, that are 300, 400, 500 years old, and they can withstand everything. They've been through it all. And so they have these deep roots. They have this strength. They have this power to them. So they're a symbol of power, of strength, of regeneration. And so it was my way of saying, um, it is in your power to be strong. It is in your power to, because my son did what he did because he was an empath. It was very difficult for him to live in a world where he just didn't feel like he could fit in anywhere,
Mm.
because as an empath, as you know, the world can be um, pretty harsh. There's a
Yeah.
lot of harshness. And so it's my way of saying there is a superpower in within empathy. Empathy is a superpower because that's what the world really truly needs. It needs more love. It needs more
Yeah.
empathy. It needs more tenderness. It needs more compassion. It needs more caring. And instead of always making it like it's all about me, let's make it it's me and it's about you. Let's make it a win-win from now on. What is it? Is there something in it for me? Yes, but there's something in it for you too. So the 21 olive trees it symbolizes my um, the strength that is within each one of us. And so I picked the 21 because they symbolize the 21 years of his life. And the book is subdivided into sections. So there's 21 poems, and I also created 21 fables. And each
Oh,
fable has a moral to it because, as you know, fables have typically fables carry a moral with it. But I didn't want this book to be sort of like, I wanted it for it to be a companion for when you're grieving or when you're going through a loss, because loss is a not it's so grief is a natural form of um, we go through grief when we're losing something. It can be the loss of someone, but it can also be the loss of a job. It can be a divorce. It could be a natural man-made disaster. Any form of loss is grief. And so I just wanted to create a companion for someone who's going through their grief, their dark moments. But what I didn't want this book to be was a book that tells you how you should grieve, how you shouldn't grieve, or how you should feel or how you shouldn't feel. It's sort of just like a companion that lets you grieve at your own pace. And I'm not telling you, oh, this book helps you through grief, but it tells you when you should stop grieving. You can just, everybody grieves differently. Everybody, there are people who grieve longer than others. But it's nice to have a companion, a hand that holds yours.
mm. Yeah, that is so important to be able to have that because I I went through, well, my sister, that was my most recent loss and this was 6 years ago already now. And so, yeah, it is tough, and I know that some people really do, they kind of, like, expect you to be like, "Aren't you better already?" You know? And it's like
Right,
and it really is everybody's journey is unique, and it does
right.
you can't rush it, and we all have to sort of find our way through it the best we can. But I appreciate that, you've written this book to help people because I know I funnily enough, was when I brought books home from my sister's house. I one day went to look through, what I had actually brought home, and there was a book called Grieving Mindfully. And I was like,
Okay.
all right, thank you, Michaela, because it was a very helpful book for me to read. So, um, yeah, um, and I was just thinking, the time frame of this too for you. That, losing your son in 2019, right before we went into the pandemic, how did that, impact you or not impact? Maybe it made it easier to write the book, I don't know, but what was your experience of that?
It, it was it was very difficult in the beginning because
Mm,
it happened in August of 2019 and the pandemic came out
mhm.
early 2020.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was it almost came at the right time because
Mm,
it made me actually sit down instead of traveling all over the place
mm,
and doing
mm,
fundraising or photography. It made me sit down and write because I
mm,
didn't, I had so many feelings inside and so much energy inside,
mm.
the energy of love that, you used to give that love to the person's not there anymore. What am I going to do with it? So
Yeah.
I decided to write. And so it was almost like the perfect timing because it was a method of self-expression that I
Mhm.
would have never gotten to had the pandemic not, um, come out.
Yeah, that's true. Because you could
S-
have busied yourself in work, and that
Right.
and that might have actually made it worse because then you probably wouldn't have had enough time to be able to process the grief, so,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
well
Yeah.
well, it is interesting how sometimes blessings can come about from things that
In
some peop
disguise, right?
yeah.
Yep.
So,
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Um, is there, um trying to think what I wanna ask you about. Well, what was, I'll ask you this. What did you find was there any part of this writing the book that you found challenging? Or did it seem to flow out of you?
It was an interesting process because when I was saying that I felt like I was writing it with Blaze, with my son,
Mhm.
I felt him, I felt his presence. And so um, it was interesting because every morning, very early at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I would just wake up and I had this urge to write. And so it wasn't like I had an alarm clock set or anything. I just wake up automatically. And the process was very unique. I just light a candle, burn some incense, and then let it flow. And it would just come out. And so a lot of times what happened was, so I would write for a couple of hours and without editing or anything, then close. I would just write by hand, close my notebook. And then the following morning, I go back to what I had just written. And I was like, did I really write this? Because where did I come from? You know? So it was just really flowing. So I think it was me, everything that I had inside I was just letting it flow. But I felt his presence that was sort of like giving me ideas on how to express certain things in a
Mm,
way where I would have not expressed myself the same way.
yeah,
So it
and
was almost like a combined effort, and it was beautiful. The difficult part was probably maybe the first poem or two were
mhm,
very raw.
mhm,
I was just like, I didn't know how to. I just let everything out. I never
mhm,
edited the
yeah,
poems. They're very raw, but it was very
mhm,
cathartic. And I think that writing, if when you're going through grief, especially journaling,
mhm, Yeah.
Journaling is very cathartic because, you have all these emotions inside. It's important to put them to paper,
Mm.
let them out, and then
Yeah.
go back. You don't have to reread them, but let them out,
Hmm.
and it's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more because I've done that, and it's in whatever circumstance it is so helpful. So I'm glad that you have that ability to do that. And um, I'm going to ask you one last. Well, I've got two last questions to ask you, but one just to sort of revisit what you had talked about at the beginning, and because I like to ask my guests this. So you mentioned that you're always a curious person. So what are you curious about right now?
What am I curious about right now? Um, hmm. I have there is a project that I'm contemplating, and what I like to do is explore how to create a sanctuary slash retreat slash temple for mothers who have lost a child.
Mm,
And because I know what it feels like. It's like your breath has been taken away from you, and you're not, you won't be able to breathe anymore. That is, especially in the beginning, that's extremely difficult to move forward. And I didn't really have that help. There are a lot of retreat centers out there, that offer meditation and yoga, which I do. I practice all this. But I wanted to create a center. I like to create a center that is a bit different. I like to
mhm,
create a center for mothers who have lost a child, but a center that focuses on bringing out your inner child with
mm,
programs that bring out your inner child. Because if you lose a child, it's the feelings are so heavy, your heart is so heavy, you feel such a void inside, and at the same time you're heavy, so it's just, you're all a big jumbled up mess. Now, if you're able to go back to the simplicity of being a child, um, I think that would bring out that lightness again. And so that's really what I am contemplating. I am
mm,
really curious about um, exploring this idea, which I
mm.
don't think I'm ready for. I'm still working on
Yeah.
this idea, but eventually I want to do it.
Oh, I love that idea. I think it would
Mm.
be so beneficial for so many women. And I know when I was a teenager, my older brother, he actually just passed away in his sleep at 33,
Oh,
and I saw how hard that was on my mom. It was really devastating. So, and and suicide, I know it's just amps that up even more. So I just, I can't imagine the pain that you went through, and I'm so grateful that your son helped you, ultimately, work through that grief, and that you have this lovely book to show for it to help others. So, I hope one day you'll be able to, find a way to create this, and,
thank you. Yeah.
if it's meant to be, it will be. So, I do believe that as well.
Yeah, and I love to plant the trees too, the 21
Mhm.
olive trees
Oh,
is
yeah,
yeah, and
absolutely. Yeah.
so
Well, if, someone listening to this today would love to know, more about you, maybe get your book and read it, or maybe there's someone else out there who would like to invite you onto their podcast to tell your story. What's the best place for people to connect with you?
my website is lauraformentini.com, LauraFormentini.com. And the book is also on Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble, but it's also at a bunch of libraries
Oh, wonderful.
around the States. So, yeah, I was fortunate to um, I'm really happy. Again, I think this it was just all meant to be. So
Mhm.
um, yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
thank
sharing
you.
your story with us today. I really appreciate you,
Thank you
and
for
I
having
wish
me.
you much blessings and love and more random acts of kindness to come your way in
Thank you.
the
Thank
future.
you, Gloria. Thank you for having me.
And I do want to thank all of you for watching and for listening. And I really do appreciate all of you so much and encourage you to share this if you're watching it on social media today. Share it with a friend if you got some value out of it. And until next time, as always, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.